In 1997, I was down in Carbondale, Illinois, specifically at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and I was working on my master's and then getting ready to go start work on my PhD at the same place. I was living in a trailer park, which I've talked about in other videos, and at the time, I was going out with a librarian from Southern Illinois University Carbondale, the awesome library that they had there. We'd started up a relationship in, I want to say, like fairly early summer, and we'd been going out for a while. And then I got what we found out fairly quickly was Bell's palsy. Now, if you don't know what Bell's palsy is actually kind of a misnomer given what we usually think about in terms of people having a palsy. It's really a paralysis of one side of your face. In my case, if I remember right, it was the left side of my face. And it took a couple days to come on, and then it was there, and then it was, an issue for several months. And I'm fortunate in a way that I was going out with somebody at the time who was, pretty well put together and very practical, because I'm not quite sure what I myself would have done just on my own. So let me tell you how it started. I remember it was really quite warm out. I mean, it's hot as hell down in Southern Illinois in the summer. If you've heard my story about the trailer, you know that I didn't use the air conditioning. I just used fans. And I was in the trailer, and I think it was, August probably, starting to get a little bit cooler, the edges coming off. July was really awful. And I was a smoker back then. And I would do these, all-night sessions working on papers that I had to write or things like that. And I would often drink coffee and smoke cigarettes at the same time. I'd have a big ashtray that would get filled up. And as I was working on the keyboard, I would have a cigarette in my mouth, right? And you would kind of move it from one side to the next and take a puff on it. And you'd puff away while you're working because you got your hands busy doing the typing because the thoughts are flowing because you're all caffeinated and nicotined up and all that. And I noticed that the cigarette kept falling out of my mouth. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. What's going on with that? Am I just overtired or something? And then I'd pick it up and put it back in my mouth. And there was a kind of maybe tingling a bit. And, I was like, maybe I'm getting sick or something like that. And indeed, I was getting sick, but not with anything that I'd ever encountered before. So I didn't really think that much of it. It happened a couple times. And then, eventually I went to bed. I woke up the next morning, and I go into the bathroom, and, I turn the light on, and I'm washing my face, and my face feels kind of weird, and I'm not exactly sure what happened. Maybe I took a sip of coffee, and the coffee spilled out of my mouth, or maybe I tried lighting another cigarette, but I was like, holy crap, something's wrong here, right? So I go back into the bathroom, and I'm looking at the mirror, and I try to do stuff like, move my mouth around, and nothing's actually happening on one side of my face. And back then I didn't have this beard, right? So it was a lot easier to see what the hell's going on. And I was like, oh, crap, what has happened to me? And immediately my first thought, and I think this is pretty common with people who experience Bell's palsy, did I have a stroke? Because that's what you typically associate with one side of a person's face not being able to move, the muscles not working, all of those sorts of things. And, my eye was working. I could look around. So I was like, well, I don't know about that. My left side was fine, but it was pretty damn scary. I mean, I was 26 or 27 at the time, depending on if it was before or after my birthday. And so anyway, I hadn't talked at all before that, but I start seeing if I can talk normally, and it's sounding a bit weird. Things aren't moving the way they're supposed to on my left side. So anyway, I go over to the phone. There were no cell phones at the time. Well, not for people like me, right? It was all phones that plugged into the wall, or maybe a cordless phone. So anyway, I call up my girlfriend at the time, and I tell her something's happened to me. One side of my face is all messed up. It's not moving. I don't know what's going on. So she's like, all right, I'll come and pick you up. We'll let me see what's going on. So she comes to my trailer, and she looks at me a bit, and then she's like, we got to go to the hospital because clearly something is really wrong with you. So she drives me to the hospital in Carbondale. And I think we probably went to urgent care, whatever the equivalent was at the time. And so anyway, they take me in. And this wasn't the first time, actually, I had to go to the hospital. I'd been bitten by a brown recluse earlier that summer, and we thought maybe it was Lyme's disease. So, we went to the hospital then, and they that was a whole other story. And who knows, maybe that could have been somehow related to it. At the time, they had no idea what caused Bell's palsy. Now I think they have a better understanding of it. So anyway, the guy is examining me, the doctor, and they have me do a bunch of different things. And after about 10 minutes or so, he's like, well, this really looks like Bell's palsy. And I was like, well, what is that? And so he explains that it's a paralysis of one side of the face, and it affects, your lips. The muscles aren't doing what they're supposed to do. There's going to be a lot of things I'm going to have to do in order to avoid problems, and they don't know whether it's a permanent thing or a temporary thing. If it is a temporary thing, how long is it going to last? All of those things are kind of up in the air. So he gave me a couple things to take home. One of them is a small, little, I won't say jar because you could squeeze it out, and it's got a fairly viscous oil in it. And he's like, that's for your eye, man. And I was like, what? He's like, you're going to have to put some of that in your eye each day. And you're also going to have to tape your eye shut when you go to sleep, because otherwise your eye is going to stay open and it's going to dry out. And we don't want that to happen, because if your eyeball dries out, you're screwed. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're not going to blink because of the palsy. If you want to blink during the day, you can make yourself blink like that. So we're going to put some oil in it to help it keep from drying out, and you're going to have to do that. Eating is going to be a little tricky for you for a while. Drinking, you're going to have to get used to tilting your head a bit when you drink, because this side of your face is working right and you can get a good seal on it. But if you don't, food and drink is going to fall out of your mouth, and you're not going to like that. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be pretty frustrating for you. Talking is going to be a bit of a pain. It doesn't look like your tongue is too affected, but your lip is. And so, you don't sound too bad right now, but I can tell that there's something off. And so I'm like, oh man, this sucks, right? I'm only 26 years old. Why is this happening? What's wrong with me? And he's like, we don't know. It could be that you got some sort of reaction to the spider bite from, earlier this summer. It could be some kind of virus. It could be that there's a nerve that's pinched. We don't really know. We're not sure what causes this. Could be multiple different etiologies, but all we know is what to do to treat it. And there's not much we can do about that either. So you're going to have to kind of take it easy and just see what happens, and come back. I mean, if it's not like any better after a couple months, come back and we'll see what we can do, which is not much. And I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, of course, this is kind of a big blow, right? So I'm not happy about it. My girlfriend's not happy about it because, she didn't really sign on for something like this. She was a good person, so she's not going to throw me over. As a matter of fact, she was quite helpful, and she didn't view it as something, that made me less attractive or less interesting or anything like that. She viewed it as hey, this guy I like has got some problems now, and we're going to have to figure out how to get through it. So that was all fine, and eating and drinking, yeah, it took me a little while to get used to, I had to pay attention all the time to what I was doing, so I couldn't just, pick up a cup and just, take a nice sip. And, when I did that just now, if I had not been paying attention, liquid would have been coming out of my mouth, in this case, tea. And same thing with eating, so I had to be, kind of self-conscious about that. Taping my eye up at night was kind of a trip. It was weird at first, but like with most things, you kind of get used to it after a while, right? And putting the little drops in, that wasn't fun either. I don't like people touching my eye, including myself, but again, you get used to it and you just do it. Smoking, I kept on smoking, and I would just make sure to put my cigarette on the right side of my mouth. And for a long time, over a month, I just had no muscle movement, control, or anything with that left side. I could talk okay. I was pretty self-conscious at first about that. And then over time, I realized that people couldn't really, if they didn't know to pay attention, they didn't really discern any difference in how I was speaking, which is good because, as a philosophy student who also had my own students, it could be, a little bit, I was TAing at the time, being a teacher's assistant. That could be a bit of a impediment. And, I was much more concerned about my looks, appearance, how I came across back then than I am now. Let's just say more insecure about that, as many young people are, right? So anyway, I had to, be kind of careful with what I ate and how I drank and all of that sort of stuff. And then after a while, after about a month, I started having some movement back, let's say, some ability to do things like close my lips tight and move both sides of my face around and make expressions and all of that. And it was weak because your muscles, if you're not using them, what happens to them? They atrophy. And your face is full of muscles, right? So when you're smiling like this, they've got all these slogans about there. It takes 42 muscles to make a smile. I don't know if that's true or not, but it takes a lot. So, smiling, frowning, grinding your teeth together, all that stuff takes muscles, and they can get, weakened through lack of use. So I didn't get better immediately, but I would say that by the end of 2.5 months, I was back to completely normal function. And I haven't had it since, which is awesome because I think about what it was like then and how much it sucked. It was no fun. So I'm, happy that it hasn't recurred. I'm now 55 years old, so we're talking about not quite 30 years ago. Nothing like that has happened since. But if it does, I guess I'll know what I need to do, and I'll be able to recognize the signs when it happens. And it was pretty scary at first. I would say it was scary because of the potential for it being a stroke, and then not knowing how long it would last. Then it was embarrassing, frustrating, and then it eventually turned into something that was just, it was the way it was. Fortunately, I could do my job. It didn't really impede me. I had to watch how I ate and drank. My girlfriend didn't say, "Oh, I don't want to be with you" or anything. She was very supportive. So it wasn't awful, right? But it could have been much worse. Let's just say that. It could have been forever. It could have really affected my life. But I moved on from it. And again, like I said, I'm not quite sure why I was thinking about this lately, but I recalled what it felt like to have that side not work the way that you want it to, and to be, I've used the word self-conscious, to be, worried about how other people would be perceiving you. I remember that very strongly. And I'm really glad that it's passed. And whoever, if anybody's suffering from it, man, my heart goes out to you. So that's enough of that story. Maybe you find it interesting. Maybe somebody who's suffered or suffering from Bell's palsy. If you do, then, just treat them nice. It's not a fun thing to go through. And we'll just leave it at that.